Right, good morning everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. If anybody can't hear me, can they either send through a question or respond on the chat window? But hopefully you can all hear me and we can get started. I'll just give it just 10 seconds. Right, so as I said, hopefully you can all hear me. Nobody's posted back to say they can't for any reason. Thank you very much, all of you, for dialing in this morning. Just check. Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry, just a little bit of a juncture on whether people could hear us or not there. So fine, brilliant. Everybody can hear us, which is great. So thank you all for dialing in this morning. Thank you for coming on this webinar. I'm going to keep my introduction as brief as I can. Those of you who've known me for a while will know that I do like to talk. So I'm going to keep my introduction as brief as I can, and I'm going to hand over the baton to David Stevenson from Logrhythm to go through the product and go through what we want to cover off in this session. Just a little bit about myself and about Bytes Security Partnerships, for any of you who don't know who we are. My name is David Rawle. I'm the Technical Director of Bytes Security Partnerships. I've worked in the IT industry for over 15 years now. 2 years ago, Bytes Security Partnerships were bought by the Bytes Technology Group in the UK. We are now part of that group, fully integrated into it, and we have two sister companies, Bytes Software Services and Bytes Document Solutions. Software Services are a specialist, top specialist Microsoft reseller in the UK, and Bytes Document Solutions are a top Xerox partner in the UK. And obviously there are advantages to working with a group who can handle all of the different areas. But obviously that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about is SIEM, security information event management. And I think really, you know, the message that we want to get across and what we want to cover off in this seminar today, or this webinar today, is that a lot of people used to view SIEM almost in the same category as intrusion detection, in that it was something you had to have for compliance reasons, probably something that didn't add a significant amount of value to your business maybe. You just had to have one. And we always used to get the same question asked about it, as we said here. So how can I actually make it do something? I've got this product that's consolidating all of these logs and doing all of this stuff, but ultimately it's not actually adding any value other than making me look at the screen or run reports from the auditors and do that kind of stuff. And SIEM has changed in the same way that the internet has changed from purely being static web pages that people can see to moving into the whole, a little bit of a cliche now, but the Web 2.0 type stuff with applications and rich content where you can, you can actually work from web apps through Google Apps or Office 365, that kind of stuff, without even having an application installed. SIEM has very much changed as well, in that it's become a product that can actually do something and help you look after your network, as well as merely being a product that reports on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to David Stevenson from Logrhythm, and he's going to actually talk about and give some examples of the stuff that Logrhythm can do and talk about the product in general. So David, hopefully you're there. I've unmuted you. You should be there now.
Hello. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Thank you, David.
I'm going to make you the presenter, and then I'm going to mute out myself. So.
Good. Thank you very much, David. Can I just check the obvious stuff that everyone can see and hear me okay? They're looking at a slide with my name on it?
Yeah, looks good to me, David. All looks fine.
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming this morning. What I really wanted to run through, as David was saying, was a little bit of an introduction to Logrhythm and SIEM, and particularly that there were some themes we set out at the beginning of why we're going to run this session, so that we could essentially work out how we could work out who's doing what, where, and when on the network. Are you being breached now? How do you respond in time? How can we reduce incident response time in particular? And how can we detect the damaging behavior from the noise that's going on? And certainly from the theme of my presentation today, it's visibility. And one of the things I think that Logrhythm really gives is that insight and understanding of what is happening. What is potentially anomalous and threatening behavior from what is just the normal routine activity that's occurring continuously in the network. And really in my little presentation here, I wanted to illustrate in effect exactly how we would do that. So how we're going to detect and respond to threats, breaches, anomalous behavior. Also, how we just make sure you are compliant, and particularly how we deliver early identification and fast response to incidents. So that's what I want to do. I also would like to show you some things running on a live demo system. So it isn't just a little bit of a slideware. I've got a couple of use cases that I would like to get into. And I do want to talk about some of the details of how we do what we do. I think the thing for me, of course, is that it's the noise, right? How are we going to understand who is doing what and where? How can we tell if a user is apparently authenticating from the Ukraine at the same time they're also authenticating from London? How can we tell if a process has started on my web server, which shouldn't really run on that kind of server? That's the kind of things that we enable at Logrhythm, and that's where we think advanced analytics are required. And this is what we're going to have a little look at. So if I deal with a sort of high level of what we do, well, the inputs, as the name would suggest, Logrhythm, we work with logs, forensic data. We collect logs from all kinds of different technologies, from all the usual ones that you would expect from Windows, Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto, FireEye, and many others. But we also think it's interesting and important to gather perhaps data that people perhaps have not necessarily thought maybe as interesting and compelling as it might be. So things like badge readers, that's a very important one, for example. It allows you to determine or can correlate against if someone has badged themselves into a building, at the same time they're also authenticating to, in Australia. How can that be so? So sometimes the more unusual parts of the infrastructure are equally interesting as the standard technologies that run. Point of sale devices is another one. That's where you also can take it. So we collect a lot of logs and enable forensic analysis to take place. In addition to that, we're also able to generate our own data, critical data sets, intellectual property theft. Well, Logrhythm does file integrity monitoring. We generate our own logs to look for who's modifying, reading, using, changing, copying sensitive data sets. We can look for and watch processes starting and stopping, data being removed and added to DVD and USB type devices, who is connecting to hosts, TCP and UDP. We can do deep packet inspection, packet capture flow data, do forensics, layer 7+ type application functionality, so see what applications are crossing and using the network. And all of that enables to, if you like, apply our intelligence to do a whole range of activities. The first one is apply a normal timestamp so that we can have a true time picture of what's happening in the environment. So irrespective of whether the activity is taking place in a time zone like New York or the UK or Australia, we're able to therefore to apply a kind of a true time comparison of what's happening irrespective of where that happens to be. We have a simple, high-level method of classifying data. As I mentioned, we do collect data from all kinds of different technologies, but we have around 39 high-level classifications that enable, for example, logs that one might get from an IDS or an IPS system to indicate attack-type activity, to also be classified in the same way as similar types of logs that I might see on a firewall. We're then able to parse and normalize that data. So, one of my boss's favorite expressions is there is gold in the logs. There's so much useful data, so we can remove out large amounts of data from, for example, source IP, destination IP, flow address, TCP, port, name, account, origin, login, a whole range of data, including customized data that we can pull out from logs if required. We're also able, therefore, to then apply context to that data. Data that isn't, for example, normally present in log files, such as your company headquarters, your regional offices, which country the log came from, which country the log went to, the direction the log message is moving in. All of that is extra data that we add on. I call it data enrichment. So it adds a great deal to the abilities that we have in terms of how we analyze, process, correlate, and potentially alarm upon that data. Risk and priority is something else we think is enormously important. All users, networks, hosts are not the same, and some things are more important than others. So enabling, if you like, attention to be focused on the things that really matter is important to us at Logrhythm. We're then able to analyze and process all that data in real time. We collect logs, we process them as quickly as we get them, so the information is available really almost just as it's being processed. So we've got visibility into what's happening. This, of course, enables us to do it, and I'm going to show you some of this in just a little while. Do some profiling, some dynamic whitelisting, trending data, histogram type data, look for patterns. All of this is functionality that we have in the product that enables us to deal with some of the issues that we were alluding to, such as who's doing what and where, what's the damaging behavior versus what's the noise. And finally, it gives us great forensic abilities to search, to profile, to trend, to visualize, to show, to pivot data, to correlate, to drill right down. And just in a few clicks, you should be able to access any log message inside the environment, all from our web GUI. And the results, well, we give meaningful, actionable data that cut straight to the chase. Prioritize alarms and alerts. How important are they? Real-time dashboard and consoles showing you what's happened really within seconds of it having happened. And we do have a whole range of reports built into our functionality dealing with all kinds of issues from PCI to GPG to ISO, SCADA type systems, as well as customizable reports for managers and analysts. And finally, and some of the really interesting and important stuff, and we're going to have a little look at this, the ability to take corrective action. We call this smart response in Logrhythm. I'm going to look at a couple of reasons in just a few minutes. But taking automated actions by script, which we know are predictable and will deal with an issue really almost as it's happened. And incredibly importantly as well to have the functionality to have that type of response and remediation approved before it actually takes place. And I'm going to show you that when I look at how I deal with, for example, a user, potential hacker logging onto a sensitive host. So if I move on and really start to focus on particularly our advanced correlation and our advanced analytics, this is what I really want to look at in this session. And the Logrhythm, we call it the AI engine, but in effect what we're really doing is that we're getting value out of potentially any single log that is being collected in the infrastructure. It enables us to build sophisticated rules to deal with all kinds of cyber threats, from insider threats and sabotage, threat, fraud, etc., to also include external threats and also operational issues. And I'll look at a few examples in a minute. Building these types of rules, we have a simple block approach of dragging and dropping blocks, so it's an easy, simple method to build these types of rules. But we also have more than 300 different rules that we have created ourselves, deal with a whole range of different scenarios. And when I get to some of the use cases, I'm going to show you one which enabled the detection of a zero-day exploit in a customer of ours, and that was one of our out-of-the-box rules. But we do at Logrhythm try to keep things simple, so we've written things to be plain, simple, straightforward language. You don't have to be an enormously sophisticated, experienced user to work with this. It should be easy and it should be straightforward. But fundamentally, what we're also doing is we're doing all of this in fast memory analysis. So we're doing our correlation, we're doing our baselining, we're doing our profiling in memory, so it's quick. So, when I talked about the ability to create advanced type correlation rules, let me just dwell on how we do this for the moment. So when we're building our rules, we use blocks. Our advanced correlation rules can include up to 3 blocks, and in each of them it will have a data source, a criteria, perhaps it might have day and time features such as out of office hours or at weekends, and certain conditions such as how many I have to see before that the block is satisfied. And I can have different types of blocks. The log observed, for example, an authentication failure or authentication success. I can have threshold values. So for example, the amount of data that might be transferred. So if we're considering something like a data exfiltration scenario, my rule might fire on a certain amount of data being transferred, say perhaps over say half a megabyte. I can also include rules, blocks in my rules which might have unique values, more than 3 failed logins, for example. And finally, I have behavioral elements, trending data, rate data, histogram type data, more than 2 failed logins, more than 10 times the amount of logs than I normally get from a file server. And let me look at a quick, simple example before we start to open up the product and have a look. This is one of our out-of-the-box rules, and a simple one, but it shows quite nicely what we're able to do from an advanced analytics point of view. The first one is a log observed rule block. The log is looking for a service stopping, and it's for one of my critical hosts in service. Now, for the rule to finally fire and create an alarm, I must therefore not see a log that told me that same service had started again within a period of 5 minutes. So if we consider this as a use case, this is potentially someone or something stopping a service on a host and not seeing that service restarting again within a 5-minute period. So if we look at it from one point of view, if a piece of admin takes place on a host, the service stops and then it restarts again, this rule won't fire because the service has come back again. But if either because of some kind of operational failure or an for the service stopping, and we're also looking for that service not having restarted again within a period of 5 minutes from the same host and the same service. And it's a very neat example of one of our little built-in rules. It's a very simple one, but very powerful. Fast, quick notification of something has gone wrong. Now, the next thing I really want to talk about is our abilities to help profile and understand what is normal behavior and standard inside the network. Now, we believe at Logrhythm that the manual discovery of activities is pretty much impractical. But just because of the sheer volume, continuous change, the amount of devices, locations, etc. So what we believe is to help organizations understand what is kind of normal in the infrastructure in the enterprise is an automated method to discover what it is that's normal across all the different dimensions that make up behavior inside our network. And that ranges from things such as which users are logging into the system, what access rights do they have, are they mobile people, which geographic locations are people using, what applications are being used, which data are they using, how many transactions do they run, what type of devices do I have, what about the external context, how much of a risk is that machine at from being attacked, how much would a threat would it pose if that machine was compromised and used as a platform for an attack. Where are people connecting from? Which way are they going to? How much data is being transferred? All of those factors, we believe, add up and enable a building of a picture of what makes for normal behavior inside the network. So developing a method to profile that and create a picture of normal behavior we think is crucially important. And this is what we've done, and here are some of the techniques. The first one, as my last slide was really talking about, was a kind of dynamic whitelisting. And there's 2 examples that I'll give you here as use cases. For example, the creation and the building of a whitelist that people normally VPN in, which countries they normally VPN in from. That's a simple example. And one of my own favorites, and we're going to look at this one in just a few minutes, which processes might normally run on my web servers. So I can watch and build. So in my dev environment, I might create what my ideal build for my web server is. Logrhythm will observe the processes that normally run, and there we go. We have built a dynamic list of the regular processes that should run. So therefore, now that I know that, I'm potentially able to spot when a new process starts. So therefore, I can deal with that situation. But we can also deal with other types of situations. And if we look at this one here about average and trend data, and if we look at the use case, the average amount of bytes sent per packet to a web server. Well, if we see 10 times a decrease in size, that might indicate to us there's a potential denial of service going on, because I'm now seeing such an average smaller packet size on my web server than I normally do on that host. Rate information. One of the most simple and basic one is the amount of logs per log source. Well, so if I see more than double the increase in the rate of logs coming from the firewall, perhaps that tells me something. So it's all really very much in the context of the host, the network, the person, the user, and what we're doing is we're baselining. So we're watching what happened previously, say perhaps either over comparing this day to last day, or 8 hours now from 8 hours previously, however long we have to think is appropriate as we create the rule. And the final one, and we'll see an example of this in one of the use cases that I have, is things like histogram type data. It's got to happen more than a certain amount of times, more than 4 times, more than 5 times. And as we'll see with one of my examples, I can combine these. So I might be looking for a doubling the previous rate from this hours compared to the previous 8 hours, and it must be so more than a certain amount, say perhaps like something like half a meg. So let's begin to move ourselves on a little bit and look at some use cases and how we might do that. Now, I've got 2 broad areas where I want to talk about use case. Firstly, in the fight against malware, and secondly, also in the theft of credentials. Now, if I just perhaps move away and move into my demo system. So I'm just going to open this up now. Now this is the console that we can see that we're looking at. Now in one of my slides I talked about the dynamic whitelisting functionality we have. And what I really like to do now is just spend a few minutes looking at how we do that and how we can actually then use that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our Advanced Intelligence Engine in the console. I'll open this up. So if we take for example, the use case of the profiling something like my web server, here is a rule that I built. Dynamically list all of the processes that we'd normally run. In this case, my web server is called Falcon. And this is the rule block that I've made. So this little block here on the side is the profile. So if I click Profile and then click View Data, you can see what I learned when I was in my baselining period. So when I was watching this server in its baselining, these were all the processes that were observed actually running on this host. And you can see some of them: Flash, CF-non, RDP clip, etc. So now, of course, I've got some really powerful data at my disposal. Notice the learning period I put it through, it was fairly short. So as I mentioned, if perhaps I was doing this in my dev environment, it wouldn't take me long. Fire some synthetic transactions at it, and I now have a list of all the processes that should normally run on my server. So of course, what I'm now able to do, and now that I have this running as a rule, let's watch what happens. In a sort of very simple example here, if I see something starting which wasn't actually on that list. So if I open up services here for the moment, and we'll use that good old volume shadow copy, which was not one of the services. So I'm just going to execute my false little exploit here. So we'll let that run. I'm just going to go back to the dashboard. And we should now see when I refresh the window, well, volume shadow copy has now kicked off because I've mimicked my exploit, which has started a new process on the host. So we'll let that function. Now, there we go. We've now seen my rule firing, executing MDBA process server. So if I scroll that down, we can see. Okay, I must have started 2 processes off. Now running. Off it goes. And it's now put off the service which I started. And it did that because I was running the smart response functionality. And you can see executed success. So a very simple example of how I used my baseline whitelist to look for processes which didn't normally run, and I switched it off using my smart response functionality. Now if I just come back to the rule for a second, MDBA process web server, there's the same rule that was fired. If I click actions, you can see here, there is the script that I run, and really all these are is PowerShell scripts that I'm building into my rules to take a corrective action. Now this one run without any approval, but if I wish, and when we look at one of the later rules that I'm going to run, all I would have to do is add in who I would like to be the approver of the rule, and then that user will have the chance to say yes or no if that rule should fire. So a really simple example, and of course what I can now do with that data, I can create much more complex and sophisticated scenarios. So if I just perhaps come back here to one of my other built-in rules, if we look here at some of the other rules which we have here, attack, compromise, followed by process starting, well, hey, now what I'm able to do is that I'm able to correlate the log perhaps that I might see coming from an IDS telling me that perhaps I see a host being attacked, but it's followed now by a consequential start of a process which wasn't on my dynamic whitelist. So I'm able to use that data that I compiled, which was germane particularly to the web server, inside the context of a rule which is telling me, hey, that attack has potentially done something which has now actually kicked off a brand new process which shouldn't run there. And of course, for smart response, you saw the functionality that I had to then put that off and stop that from spreading any further. And that was a little example. I'm going to come back and look at another example of this in just a little while. So if I pick up where I really was, and I said in terms of how we can use this to fight malware, well, I've got, for example, a real use case from one of the built-in rules that you saw in the console. And this was where it helped a customer who was infected by an unknown and unusual exploit. Something as well I'm very keen on as well is building value out of other technologies. In this case, I'm going to show you how we do that with FireEye. And I also want to have a little look at how we might, if you like, gain some intelligence from unknown traffic that we might see from something like some kind of device with layer 7+ functionality. The first one is I've got here is around what happened to a customer of ours who was infected by an exploit. We don't really know how the exploit got on the machine, but it did. It was missed by the traditional defenses, the anti-malware technology that was in the environment the customer had. Customer, however, was extremely concerned about their reputation. If you knew who they were, you would understand, and was very well equipped with expensive, good vendor technology. Nonetheless, there was an exploit on the host, and this is what happened. So, the host attempted to communicate with a range of command and control servers. And all of a sudden, a whole array of messages were sent from that host to all of the other hosts that it was attempting to communicate. So high volume command and control traffic suddenly started to occur from this host. The firewall blocked some of them because they were known bad hosts. Others made it through. Each one of those connection attempts resulted in a log coming to Logrhythm. So we saw all of those logs. And let's really talk now about what that enabled us to see and to understand. So we counted all of those connections. Remember, as I was saying earlier, we were also able to determine that they all had an outbound direction. So we saw hundreds of outbound connection attempts all coming from the same host. And this is what we could conclude. A threshold of more than 100 connections, all from the same machine, and all going outbound from the network, and all within a period of 10 minutes. That isn't normal behavior from a host. This triggered one of our built-in rules. There was an email sent to the admin, an alarm rang in the console, and the host was taken on very quickly by the admin. So that was a very simple example of how we were able to detect the behavior of something like a botnet, not by a signature or a patch, but by the way it was behaving, and simply from the counting of the data and establishing the direction, and being able to correlate it came from one single machine. Very powerful and simple use case. The question I have, though, is that could we have handled that situation even more effectively? And if I now consider how we might have focused our response a little bit differently, well, if we consider high-risk users, someone like the PA or the executive assistant, who we know are likely to be spearphished, access to sophisticated systems. So we could have perhaps used smart response to take different actions depending upon the type of person. As I mentioned a little earlier, smart response can have approvals in place, and those approvals can occur up to 3 times. When you saw me firing the process at once, there was no approval. It just switched the rogue process off. So what I could do for someone like such a high-risk user of a attack like a PA, I could take a smart response to disconnect a machine from the network and prevent any further communication from the exploit. I could potentially change proxy settings by script to a different gateway, so the PA now has to explicitly authenticate, at least while I investigate further. I could even run a vulnerability scan on the host to look for potentially other issues which may have been caused by the exploit. And these are just illustrative examples. As you saw when I looked at the rule a bit earlier, these are just scripts that we build into PowerShell. So really almost the world is our oyster in terms of the remediative actions that we could take. However, that perhaps is appropriate in the context of someone such as a high-risk person like an executive. Could do, as I was mentioning that we can have up to 3 layers of approval, I might only take that type of action after approval by the IT admin, and of course the line manager, the head of the call center. So I've got full approval to have that machine rebuilt overnight, and that the exploit is cleaned without physical interventions locally. Different approach, different response, depending upon the type of user and the kind of risk that they're at from attack. So if we review what we added there in terms of value, well, the added value was we were using threshold behaviors, values to spot and profile unusual activity. We gave quick warning of a strange activity happening by an exploit, and we gave the opportunity there to take different actions to mitigate against the threat and the damage while work continued. And of course, I think as well, we also helped reduce the time to manage that as an incident. If I now talk a little bit about a slightly different scenario in terms of Logrhythm and its integration with something like FireEye. And I've got a couple of use cases here of which I've called the road warrior returning to the office, and also looking at the techniques that exploits might use to spread sideways into the environment. Because if we take the first one, our good old-fashioned road warrior, well, you know, he gets infected when he's in an airport, out of the office, in a hotel, and bang, my exploit is now on his laptop. He may not necessarily have been very good at keeping his AV up to date, and he's soon going to be back in the office. So if we look now what happens when he returns to the office and plugs into the domain, in he comes, FireEye sitting in path and WebMPS, the exploit is existing on his machine. The call home now begins from the host. FireEye will see this. Of course, FireEye will block it because of its ability to stop command and control from going any further forward. So that at least has been stopped. So that issue has been isolated. FireEye will send a log saying there has been command and control traffic sent to Logrhythm. However, what we haven't seen is we haven't seen the original log telling this has been an infection because it was infected offline. So we have an infected machine with command and control traffic. So what might happen is something like this. We may take a smart response, potentially to force a full refresh of group policy settings, as he's now back in the domain. So a very simple method saying, well, okay, if the exploit has perhaps changed registry settings, modified other things while it's been on his host, let's now force everything to be applied back to the machine. Again, is one example of how I might at least stop any further damage occurring on that host. So the added value there. Well, FireEye is capturing command and control traffic. It saw it as it arrived in the corporate network and stopped it from going further. And then Logrhythm took a smart response action. This one specifically targeted at my mobile users. And then, of course, it began attempts to identify and isolate this. And in my case, I used an example of a full refresh of group policy to make sure that no settings were altered or modified by the exploit. Now, I have another little scenario here of how Logrhythm and FireEye might combine. In particular, I'm dealing with the vector of malware spreading laterally across the environment. Now, if my exploit comes down, this time I have FireEye out of path. So FireEye detects the exploit in the malware execution engine. Command and control traffic begins from the host. And of course, perhaps a typical pattern might be that the exploit now begins to enumerate map drives on the host. So perhaps if there are 5 map drives here on this machine, my exploit is now beginning to connect to all 5 of them. So all of this is going on invisibly. Each one of those connection attempts will be generating a log. Those logs will be going to Logrhythm. And there we go. We've seen all of that happening, collected all of those logs about all of that activity. So what we see here, we see an infection log on a host, followed by command and control traffic from the host, followed by more than 5 connection attempts in 1 hour from the same host. All adds up to the behavior of an exploit. So perhaps we might use smart response to move that host to an isolated, heavily firewalled VLAN, because we have seen the pivoting of the lateral spread of malware combined with the exploit logs that FireEye have told us, so we move the host onto an isolated VLAN to stop any further communication by the exploit. Simple, neat example. The issue has been isolated. So the added value there? Well, FireEye is seeing zero-day exploits others miss. Logrhythm is corroborating that by profiling connection types, behaviors, and volumes, and identifying and prioritizing response based upon that type of behavior having been seen. Now, the final one which I really want to deal with before we kind of move on a little bit and look at a slightly different scenario, is how I might use this type of data in a different way and look at trends. Now, you know, of course, that I can work with things like data from Active Directory, so things like group membership. And in this case, I'm going to concentrate on our good old friends in the Human Resources Department. We know, of course, they're very vulnerable to attack, and you know, look people up on LinkedIn, create some kind of exploit, find them, attack them. So I'm going to look at how Logrhythm can use the data that I might get from FireEye potentially to tell me if there is a more concerted, different type of attack being planned on my HR people. So if my external attackers are plotting what they're going to do, well, of course, because at Logrhythm, I can trend the data. Remember I was saying I can take average and rate trends, and I can baseline that against previous time period. So on Monday, I might see from FireEye an exploit targeted at someone in the HR department. On Tuesday, I might see another attack. So far, it's kind of run-of-the-mill activity. You know, attacks do happen. Maybe even on Wednesday, maybe I see 2 attacks happening on people in the HR department. But just regular attack activity. It's not an unusual thing for them to be attacked. This is the normal level. But what if suddenly my attackers suddenly become much more focused and concentrated, and I see an increase in the velocity and the frequency of attacks that suddenly take place? This is what I can identify by doing my baselining against average and rate trends that are occurring. So I've suddenly had insight into an increase. So I saw that double the usual amount of zero-day exploits took place, and as I said, I could use histogram data in conjunction with that, more than 4 in 24 hours. So FireEye is identifying zero-day and unusual exploits, and Logrhythm is identifying a change in behavior in terms of the volume and frequency, indicating that people are getting much more serious at this moment in time at attacking HR. And how else would we see that kind of data and understand that type of pattern really is my point here. Now, next I want to move on really into a use case about unknown type traffic. If you have devices that are capable of doing layer 7+, you know, packet shapers, for example, they will classify traffic, if you don't know what it is, as unknown. That's a really important stream of traffic to use for. So, for example, I'm suggesting here that we consider looking for concentrations of unknown traffic coming from one user or one device. So I can have a rule in Logrhythm that's looking for twice as much inbound or outbound unknown traffic than I usually get from a host. I'm baselining it every 8 hours, and it must be more than half a megabyte. That's important information to understand if I'm seeing such a marked increase in unknown traffic from one machine or one user. In addition to that, what about if I see it coming from a particular country? Vietnam, China, unknown traffic coming from those types of locations. So I could have a trend rule that tells me I've seen 1.5 times the previous day's unknown traffic coming from a particular country. So fast, quick notification and a change in the levels of unknown traffic, which potentially pose such a threat. Now, what I'd like to do really is to, as we kind of reach the last sort of 10 minutes or so of the session, is to move on to a different scenario, which is the theft of credentials. I've talked really a little bit about how we might help in the fight against malware. In this case, I want to focus on what happened to Nissan. Nissan were hacked, and the belief was that user account credentials were stolen in the hack. And here are a couple of highlight quotes that I have. They believe the intruders could have stolen the credentials, and they also believe that the company thinks that customer or employee data wasn't compromised. But what if it was? Right? How could Logrhythm have helped here in this type of scenario? Now, as I mentioned, we can profile what users normally do in terms of the hosts that they may normally use. So if we take Joe here from marketing, there's Joe on the left. In my profiling, I know that Joe normally uses the host engineering 1, design 1, and engineering 2, but it doesn't connect to this machine called HR1. So that's the regular use that Joe has of some hosts. So if we take the scenario that Joe's credentials were stolen, and who knows, we might see Joe VPN in. So when Joe VPNs into the VPN point, Logrhythm will collect the log. Joe then logs on to the HR server. Logrhythm collects the log. And now, Joe is on the HR server. So what's Logrhythm seen here? Well, we've seen a user called Joe who's never logged in from China before. And we've seen user Joe who's never logged on to the HR server before. So I might use Smart Response to log Joe off the HR server. And we're going to see this in just a minute. So what have we done here? Well, at this point, we don't know if this is a hacker, nor do we know if it really is Joe. If it's a hacker, we've got him off the critical host. And if it really is user Joe, well, user Joe maybe has a question as to why someone in marketing is potentially working with a server they've never normally logged into before. However, what I'm giving the analyst a chance, now that we've had such quick notifications, Smart Response has dealt with the immediate threat of the HR server, the analyst, of course, can choose to tail the user and run a live log tail on Logrhythm to watch everything else that user Joe is doing as he's actually, in the network. So I'm enabling the analyst to have almost immediate access to everything that Joe is doing and to follow him live like a detective. So what I'd really like to do is actually let's look at that working, because I said I would show you Smart Response with the approval function. So if I now come back to my demo system, back to my dashboard, and this time, let me do just that. So that is my HR server. I've logged in remotely. This time I'm coming in as David Rogue. So I'm now logged on. Of course, I'm going to ignore this because I think no one can see me doing this. Click OK. And there I am now on the HR server. So what we're going to see happening is that my alarm is going to fire, telling me that I have a suspicious authentication attempt having occurred. Here we go, user authenticating to unusual host. Let's now look at this alarm. Now you'll notice there is an approved denied status, so nothing has happened yet. And if we just take a look at the properties of the alarm, let's see, well, it's telling me the origin login is David Rogue. So what we're going to do is that we're going to approve this action. So I've seen enough to be suspicious. There is the log itself. Let's now fire this. Action. So I will now approve this rule. Click OK. Yes. Done. And let's now watch what's going to happen to me as David Rogue. Bang. I'm now off. So very shortly after the analyst detected the alarm ringing, indicating a user logging on to a host they don't normally log on to, they had the chance to investigate, profile the user, and then fire this response. So I'm now off the host. So the thing really is that if we consider that, I have isolated the issue. the hacker can now get no further forward on this machine. So if we review what we did there, we identified that this is a user coming in via remote access methods from an unusual country of origin, that he went to a host he didn't normally go to, but then we gave it option to initiate log off with smart response. And of course the high value target was isolated, leaving the analyst free to completely remove the user or to tail the hacker if they wished to. So I've kind of pretty much reached the end of the session. That's about just coming up to 5 to 11. Of course, remember I talked originally how, at the beginning, how Logrhythm, I think, extracts and gets value out of log data from all kinds of different technologies. It enables us to perform, network forensics, packet captures, create our own logs, to process those, to classify them, to perform advanced correlation, to assess risk, to look for unusual behavior, to create dynamic whitelists, and then to create remediative action, take responses and tell you what's happening almost as it's really happened. So at that point, what I'd really like to do, Dave, is to sort of open everything up a little bit. If there's any questions that anyone has in the time that we have left.
Yeah, thank you, David. I can see we've had one question, which I don't know if you can see, which is to do with file integrity monitoring. Just a question around how is that done, and do you use an external correlation unit? So I don't know if that's something.
Yes, for file integrity monitoring, we create our own logs. Because we think doing things like security auditing on Windows is difficult, we actually make our own log source. So we use an agent running on a critical host to do that. We will essentially create a profile of what it is that we want to monitor on a particular folder on a file. So for example, do we want to monitor modifications, deletions, copies, even potentially even reads? And that policy is then applied to the agent running on the host. So it is then making logs to look for the policy changes and policy definitions that we have created centrally. So we use an agent to do that.
Okay. Another couple of questions there about size of the network would Logrhythm be typically aimed at?
We have appliances for the very small customers to the very big ones. We have customers like the US Air Force, MetLife, Fujitsu, so really big people as well. Our architecture is distributed in the sense that we can run everything all on a single self-contained appliance, but we can also distribute it across various components for larger environments, geographically distributed places.
Okay, so a whole range then, effectively.
Yeah, so for the big boys like Fujitsu and NASA, US Air Force, and down to, we have many small, medium-sized customers as well.
And the other sort of follow-up question to that is what IT resource would you normally expect to be required to run and look after that setup?
Well, it certainly requires someone to be skilled in the product to learn how to use it. We have things such as, for example, email notifications, SMT notifications, so people don't have to be watching it continuously. The type of, for example, the alerts that you saw me there was when I saw a process starting on a web server which shouldn't normally run, and when I saw a user logging on to a host, I could be told about that by email, and I can make sure that different people hear about different types of alarms. So if you like, the ability to use the console and to at least understand what's happening can be distributed across various different people. But certainly I would expect one person in the department to be reasonably au fait with, how to be the admin of the system, how to use the console, how to look after it. But there should be something for almost for everyone in the IT department at Logrhythm, because we get so much data relating to things like operations issues, security issues, and audit issues. I think there's value for a range of people in the IT world.
Cool. So sort of the follow-up question to that was, so if you've got multiple sites, you'd require multiple appliances on each site, which I think is probably a yes, isn't it? Although could you monitor through VPNs if you wanted to?
No. It depends. I mean, it depends on the size of the site, really. I mean, for a fairly kind of small, medium site, probably all we would do, frankly, is suggest an agent on site to collect the logs, because our agent will compress and encrypt the logs, and that makes for a more efficient collection process. But it's not required to have any hardware. In fact, not required to have anything on a remote site if needed. But often it makes it more efficient to have a software agent perhaps running on a server, and we could do that in a virtualized environment, for example, because the compression of logs is a very basic feature and a very important one, because it's going to save bandwidth. And encryption of the logs as they're sent back makes sense because obviously it protects the data as it's crossing the network. So it just depends, but usually for remote sites it will make sense to have some kind of a collection agent. But that said, for really big sites, we have dedicated appliances to do nothing except gather high volume, sets of log data, where there are hundreds of hosts on a remote site, and they want central analysis and compilation of the data.
Okay. Another question here from somebody on, obviously we've talked mainly about Windows. I did chuckle when I saw who asked this question. Unix, how do we go about integrating with Unix?
Yeah, we collect log sources from all kinds of Unix hosts. I just happened to mention as an example. We take Solaris, IBM, Red Hat, CentOS, all of those.
Cool. Okay. And what level of admin rights do we need to give in the domain for the product to work correctly? I mean, I assume obviously if we're trying to collect logs, we need some kind of level of admin rights. But what would we need ideally?
Well, it depends. So things like syslog, we'll just send it and they're collected by Logrhythm itself. But for things like if we come back to Windows, for example, there's a very convenient group in Windows called the Event Viewers group. And that allows us to our service, as long as it's a member of the Event Viewers group, we can collect logs from Windows hosts. So it's quite a low-level service ability, but it does exactly what's required. So that is typically what we recommend for the agent to have the rights to take logs off of Windows machines.
Okay, excellent. And just to double check. Ubuntu in that list of operating systems, I assume, is no problem if you're mentoring CentOS and things like that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
We can run if we don't mind saying it, we can run our agents on Linux hosts as well. So we actually can put agent of people who are less inclined to use Windows. Our agents run on Linux too.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Typical installation: 3,000 users, 200 servers with learning. What would you expect that in terms of sort of time scales?
5 to 10 days is the typical deployment profile of how we would expect to install it. We'll have logs coming in on day one. It might take a day or so longer if it's a software build, because our technology can be run on the customer's own servers and virtualized environment. That takes another day or so, but we rarely quote much more than 7 to 10 days. If we have unusual log sources, and if I come back to my favorite one about badge readers, we allow a day for each bespoke and unusual type of log source. So, but that is the type of, think 1 to 2 weeks. We're also very keen as well, if I might add on that point, that it's not just to install it and leave. We like to do coaching and follow-up sessions around every 6 months or so with customers to, because once you've started, once you've deployed it, achieved the basic objectives, then let's move on to a more advanced level and looking at how you can get more out of the product. So it's continually improving. So we don't believe in long implementations, nor do we not believe in contacting and following up with customers ever again afterwards.
Okay, doke. And just one last question to cover with regarding to when the appliances are distributed, you've got multiple ones of them. And the question was asked, are they peer-to-peer appliances? But I assume the appliances all kind of talk to each other and communicate in real time.
Of course, and in fact, in the event, let's say, of a failure of, either the device fails or the network breaks, they can mesh, so they can go and talk to a different one in a different location to get the logs in.
Okay, excellent, brilliant, thank you very much. Right, so that's all the questions we've had from everybody. Thanks very much, everyone. It's your time's been appreciated. I know everybody's very, very busy, and thank you very much. We've got another webinar, sort of 2 weeks-ish. Next Friday, in fact, I think it's 2 weeks. So it's next Friday regarding the Checkpoint R77 releases, which I think you've all had emails about. So we look forward to seeing some of you on that. And thank you very much, everyone. Your attendance is very much appreciated. Thank you.